And we're live. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us today for a panel on maintenance centralization. Do we have to choose between efficiency and experience? And why I brought this up is I came from the AIM conference a few weeks back, and there's a ton of conversation around resident retention. And then obviously we're talking a lot about centralization in the market right now, but nobody seems to be having the conversation at the same time. What I do hear often is that, well, resident experience is really contingent on having a great maintenance experience, and then maintenance is moving towards an operational efficiency model that has to manage and has to be mindful of what it's delivering. And so we thought to bring these three incredible professionals together to chat about this and really be right at the talk unabashedly about their experiences in the centralization conversation, their experiences in, I'll say, in the maintenance side of things in terms of delivering the service, and then the outcome of that resident experience and how we use that for marketing. So joining us today, Jamie Dunlap from Garrett Residential, Tim Turner from F5, David Perez from RMR. All in these experiences we've had around centralization, marketing of that, and then of course the maintenance side of things. And we kind of the core conflict we're trying to talk through today is around: is this a choice? Is this an or is this an and? So we'll start with just quick introductions. Jamie, if you don't mind going first, and then we'll go with Tim and then David, and then we'll kind of follow up with the first question.
Yeah, as he said, I'm Jamie Dunlap, head of marketing over here at Garrett Residential. Got about 15 years of industry experience with a strong focus on that resident experience, kind of from start to finish.
And you guys are third party, right?
Yep, we are owner operated.
Owner operators, fantastic. Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. Tim.
I am Tim Turner. I'm the area maintenance manager for Avenue 5, Colorado, with a strong influence on maintenance, but also property management.
David.
Great. Thanks for having me on again here, Guillermo. David Perez, former SVP at RMR, was the president and COO of Carroll. We sold to RMR in 2023. Was there for 8 years as we grew from 20,000 units to 35,000 units, and then exited in 2023.
Outstanding.
And left about 3 months ago.
Wonderful. So certainly being able to capture some of your experiences in that centralization motion that you guys did at both Carroll and RMR be very valuable today. And again, everyone who's listening in, your questions are valuable and comments are valuable, so we can kind of keep this going and keep you included. So we'll start with a question where, the positive of the conversation today is start with the maintenance side. Why is maintenance, and maybe I'll flip it, Jamie, why is maintenance such a critical driver of resident satisfaction renewals?
I mean, it is one of the stickiest points that we talk about with prospects and with residents about, keeping their apartment in good shape and making sure that their home that they live in is up to what they need it to be. I mean, that's the critical nature. I mean, when you think of your own home at home, you can quickly go and call a repair guy if something's broken, and our residents are at the mercy of our maintenance teams.
And that then leads to Tim.
Yes.
That was like a very natural handoff. What does it look like? Like, what does that great maintenance experience look like to support the objectives that Jamie just described?
It's teaching and coaching your maintenance teams how they affect renewals, how they affect leasing, how they affect the overall resident experience, and not always just turning a wrench or plunging a toilet. It's understanding all of the matrix that go involved in that so that they're part of the solution and not a part of the problem.
Interesting. Now, is that common?
No, it is not common. And it goes back to the progression of the maintenance teams and the progression of property management. The resident experience and the opportunities that residents have to move from apartment to apartment to apartment. The competition is a real thing. The absorption rate in Colorado, we have more apartments than we do people. So we have to create the resident experience from a maintenance side so that we assist the marketing and the leasing side so that they're working hand in hand. We all have to be rowing the boat in the same direction.
So when you're out there hiring for maintenance folks, are you seeking for, and recognizing there's open positions everywhere, but are you looking to filter on people that demonstrate that desire to have that literacy around the full cycle of like what the P&L on a building looks like?
Yes and no. I mean, if they have that skill set, great. but that's a skill set that we can teach. That's a skill set that we can coach through. I would rather, for my guys, I'd rather have them understand the maintenance point of view. I can coach them on the resident experience part of it. When Jamie and I worked together most recently, I involved her in my lunch and learns, where she was able to understand and communicate to the maintenance guys, and they were able to ask questions.
And did they? I mean, and there's this kind of like this. I think there's an unfair representation of the maintenance tech that's out there, kind of like the jangling keys, etc. But like, are they putting their hands up in those conversations? Are they willing to be vulnerable and say, "Hey, I don't understand this part of the conversation"?
Surprisingly, several were. Yeah, I think they see the bigger picture, and those are the type of people that we want to bring in.
Oh yeah, oh for sure. And then that also begins to solve the problem around the career path, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And then David, in your world, when you guys, were starting to activate the centralization motion, was there a conversation or was there a apprehension around the resident experience?
Yeah. So I'm going to have a unique perspective here in that we went down the path of like, hey, look, we can cut costs, right? Like in a classic sort of Six Sigma type, hey, let's do process improvement. And through process improvement, we can ultimately get to cutting costs. What we sort of forgot was the whole, like, why are we doing this? And ultimately, the reason that we have apartments is for people to live in them, have places for people to have homes, and provide an experience of community, of life, of them sharing a shared space with others. And we really gravitated toward this concept of like, what's our product? Our product is like our home that we're doing, and who are our customers? Our customers are our resident. So if we put our resident and our customers at the center of what we're trying to do, and we're trying to serve them better, they're going to have a better experience. So how do we think about serving them better? It's breaking down sort of their customer journey and then aligning ourselves in a more tactful way around that customer journey. And saying, where do they need us? All right. How can we be there better for them? And how do the different tasks then need to be aligned around certain people that are good at those tasks, have the skills, and then what is the education we need to give them around those skills? So I know that's sort of like, I always talk about this like pyramid at its base level. It's like, what tasks do we need to get done? What skills do people need to get those tasks? Who do we need to hire? And how do we need to incentivize them to do that? And if we do those four things well, we deliver on experience.
Right. So experience is the product of the formula.
Right. So in breaking that down, you then say, all right, if I have people that need to do these tasks, maybe they don't have the skills, sort of to Tim and Jamie's point here, right? Can I teach them those skills? Are they adept to learn those skills? Or can I maybe create another centralized function that takes those things on, right? Like some of the communication aspects. Mm-hmm. Maybe they can handle all the paperwork. Maybe they can handle the scheduling of certain tasks, and the people that are really good with their hands and maybe lack some of those other skills can focus on delivering certain tasks, and other people can take on some of the others. And we sort of reconfigure how we then deliver on the experience holistically.
Well, and that also allows for automation. Like if we take it all out of the hand, if we also relieve the maintenance tech of all those obligations and start systematizing it all, AI and automation becomes an option.
That's right.
So I'm curious, like when as you're kind of having these centralization conversations, and I'll leave this to who wants to jump in, like, does marketing get a vote?
Yes.
I mean, I think they should.
Yes.
When we're talking about dealing with the back doors at properties, we talk about that all the time. Your back door is wide open because we're letting renewals out the door left and right. And we look at why they're leaving. And oftentimes it has to do with maintenance, and you may have an amazing maintenance guy, but their attitude might not be great. And so when they're dealing with residents in their units, they don't have a great attitude about things. Or it could be vice versa. They're just not communicating with them at all. And so when we look at how to close that back door a little bit, we focus on areas of opportunity. And oftentimes that is, in the maintenance area, in the maintenance aspect.
I was on a call earlier this morning with my team, and we were going over our Kingsley scores in maintenance and how those positively or negatively affect ATR and renewals. And one of the things I was in the call that I was on, I was talking to one of our regional managers where we have a site that the ATR is skyrocketing. And we have a lot of people just breaking leases and moving out, but it has nothing to do with maintenance. But how does maintenance counteract that and solve that for them? Is okay. So me and my maintenance supervisor, regional manager, and property manager, we're going to go walk the property. We're going to see what opportunities we have in maintenance. Where is it curb appeal? Is it FF&E? Is it any of those things that maintenance can help with and be a part of the solution?
Mm-hmm.
And do you find that aligns with the people that you're bringing on board? Like that next, we'll call it maintenance 2.0. I wish there was a better word. Someone dream of a better word. But like in that world, is that kind of what your job descriptions reflect?
It doesn't reflect it, but that's the transition of the industry. Where if you this specific property, the maintenance supervisor wants to know why people are moving out. You don't always see that. But there's also the career trajectory path for him as well, where he's elevating himself and understanding the why, closing that back door, making sure that we're capitalizing on all the opportunities. We're not just putting heads in beds.
Right.
We're creating that resident experience for a long-term resident.
So when you take those two kind of truths around the resident churn and then the people churn, like is doing it the old way? I mean, and David, who wants to jump in here? But like, is doing it the old way a choice? Is that even a practical option anymore?
I mean, I would argue it hadn't been really practical given the lack of churn, the lack of talent coming into the industry for the last. I started in 2017 and I looked around and we always had open positions in the maintenance, right? And for 8 years, we're completely staffed across our entire portfolio. There was always some sort of churn, and we've always been sort of behind the eight ball and trying to hire the old way. Since then, we've also built millions more units that also need to be maintained. And we've added millions more people to the U.S. that have moved out, that have found their own places to live, right? So we never had enough. We don't have enough coming into the workforce in this sort of trade area. So we have to think about doing things a little differently. Absolutely.
And who drives that timeline? Like, is it kind of fall on the marketing side saying, hey, we need to acquire more units to manage or to acquire them just to own them? And, or does it kind of like happen, or does it land on is it a steaming bag on your lap, Tim, when all of a sudden someone says, oh, hey, by the way, we just got hey, high five. We just won 3,000 units. And you're like, oh my God, I got to find 30 people.
Well, and it also depends on what condition those 3,000 units are in. Right. I mean, I think third-party management companies now are being very selective because of the talent pool shortage. And if a property is a heavy lift on the maintenance side, do we have the capacity to take that on and be successful? Would we rather say no and not take something on or take it on and fail? So I think that's one of the things that for us at third party, we're definitely looking at when we get those things in place. We're always recruiting, and we're recruiting for a floating team so that we can position ourselves with a new acquisition where we can place somebody from the floating team where we already have the resources in house.
And what I'd add to that is that, like, in order for Tim to get to a place where he understands where the things are going, I do think that it starts in sort of marketing, and marketing is a little vague. And I love the way sort of Jamie's thinking about it, in that it's both top of funnel and customer experience. Like, once they are living with you, right, there's still a customer. There's an experience factor you have to get in there. And that leads to the strategy. That leads to, all right, how are we driving customer experience, and what are the components of that?
Yeah.
And where are we falling short, and where can we make things up, and drive better sort of engagement along that way? And that strategy should permeate throughout all of operations, both office and outside in the more traditional world sense, right? The outside folks, in how they engage in a meaningful way, but marketing's helping go, okay, here's the information we're getting. Here's what customers really want. Here's how they're interacting with us. Here's where we need to be better, right? And they're helping guide the conversation and the actions for the teams, and really synthesizing that data.
Yeah, you almost think of it like they're all salespeople. Like even your maintenance team, they're part of the sales team. We're constantly selling, whether you're selling your current tenants on the need to renew, or you're selling future tenants on the need to come lease with you. In how competitive these markets are right now, we have to constantly be selling, and we need to be including the maintenance team in that. They need to be having that sales mentality.
Well, and one of the things that we do too is that we also, on our ownership calls, I'm including on all those calls, along with marketing, along with the regional, along with the VP. So we're all aligned with the message to the client. And that way, if there's anything the client brings up to us, we all understand from a maintenance, marketing, and operations point of view where we need to hit the mark. If Jamie and I are walking a property and we see marketing opportunities, or we see a maintenance tech that is not wearing the uniform, or is not hitting the mark, that's something that Jamie and I can help course correct with the property manager. So there are things that all the different departments have to be aligned with and speaking the same language.
How, like, when you take a look at the scope of all the units that are available for rent, where's that? What's the penetration of that kind of thinking in the marketplace? Like, is it like, I mean, are we talking about 2% of the operators operate that way? Like 3%? Is this widely being considered as a best practice, or is it an emerging best practice? Where do you guys feel that that's landing?
I would argue that the details have mattered for a long time. I think the execution of that has been more challenging of late, right? Mm-hmm. Like finding the talent that understands sort of like the mission, the goal, and the strategy of what we're trying to get accomplished has been more difficult. And I think that's what's led to maybe tech can solve some of these challenges. And whether you implement that right or wrong is sort of predicated on your process around that. I think we're not talking about things that are incredibly novel. It's just, how do we execute it in a more challenged environment with less people, less trained people, less resources, greater turnover, and on top of that, right, those are your like company challenges, changing consumer preferences, right? Mm-hmm. There was already a big change in how people interacted and did leading up to COVID. Post-COVID, expectations have changed significantly on what they sort of expect from your manager, et cetera. So it's like, how do you address that? They've always kind of been there, right? We've always talked about the 4 Ps, right? And product and promotion are huge aspects of that, as well as people. And that's been a staple in the industry for years. But now it's like, how do we address it in the construct of a changing environment, both on the consumer preferences side and our own internal challenges around people?
Well, on the people conversation, I mean, is this drive, like, the kind of collision course of, that sounds pretty violent, but like the alignment of resident experience and maintenance that's happening kind of like in real time? Is it, to kind of follow on your comment, David, and you can only pick one, you can't say both. I'll frame it. Is it because there's no budget, or is it because there's no people? Can't say both.
Yes.
Only Tim would say that.
Yeah. Well, I would say, historically, maintenance is the first budget cut. So, when things are struggling on a property, maintenance is always told, do more with less. Put some duct tape on it, put some putty on it, fix it, do it for less. Don't replace it, fix it. especially when it comes to leasing, very infrequently is an ownership group when leasing is struggling going to pull money out of marketing.
Yeah,
because that's what's going to drive people through the door.
So, but
So
even
I-
if you had the budget, like on an FTE basis, could you even hire them?
Are they available?
That's what I'm getting at. Like,
Yeah.
if you had all the money in the world, you look at the bench, there's no one on the bench. It's like having $1 million of cash on a desert island. You can't spend it.
Exactly, and that's the problem. I mean, in Colorado and Denver right now, I mean, we're again, I'm constantly recruiting, going to events and talking to people and working with people, and then you get these people in who look great on paper, and they tell me they can change the light bulb, but when the push comes to shove, can they change the light bulb?
Mm-hmm. And if they can't do that, they sure as heck aren't going to be able to do the kind of secondary skills that we're asking them to do.
Well, and the expense, the expense in recruiting before one of my maintenance guys' first day on the job, we're into them for about $6,500.
Yep.
And then we find out we've just spent $6,500 and he can't change a light bulb. Then what do we do?
Yeah. So then, like from a core skills perspective, I get how that lands in the maintenance side of things. So then, in the battle of budgets, like does marketing allow for budget to be spent? I would say allow, like partner with maintenance to spend my budget on like renewal conversations. Like how does it, like, does marketing ever come to maintenance and say, hey, we need to do a resident renewal campaign. I need your people to be involved, and I'm going to teach them this or that, or we're going to do these things. Is that how many of those conversations happen?
I've certainly done them. I think I come from an operational background, so I have kind of that knowledge of the role that they play. But it's as simple as a meet the team and having a maintenance breakfast where the maintenance guys are front and center in the office, and they introduce themselves to people and they become a friendly face around the property as you see them around there. And it can be as simple as them bringing a treat with them when they're doing a work order and, saying, hey, we popped in to fix your thing, and leaving a bag of popcorn or whatever it looks like. Just those small touches and leaving that kind of personalized aspect can really make a huge difference when it comes to renewals and including them in the process.
And does that popcorn get funded out of marketing or out of maintenance? I know it sounds
Marketing,
ridiculous.
usually.
Yeah.
Usually.
Out of marketing?
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Well, and similar to like when renewal bonuses, it doesn't come out of the marketing budget per se, but marketing has a piece in that.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I've kind of often always asked about from a retention perspective is that, when an apartment is leased, there's someone gets paid, right? But one person gets paid, but retention is a team job. And so, and I haven't got a straight answer on this, a consistent answer is that who is accountable for renewals? Like if renewals goes down, whose bonus is affected?
Everybody's. I mean,
so nobody, so everybody, so everyone and no one's, is that kind of thing? Like, is that kind of the way it works?
Yeah, I would say that. And again, I think the resident experience, when the lease is signed and they get the keys and they pop the door for the first day, the resident experience and that first 30 seconds, that's your best opportunity to even try to get a renewal, because how they walk into their first unit. If they walk into the unit and they're giving a laundry list of check-ins, on their check-in sheet, the chance of them renewing at the end of that lease are going to be a lot less.
I mean, think about the maintenance touch points in renewals. You've got the make ready and how the unit's presented upon move-in. You've got the grounds when they first move in. And then in addition to that, not only that, but you've got their entire year of every work order they submit every day that they walk the property and grounds. And that is their impression of the property and the communication that comes from that.
It's the Walt Disney approach, right? Like the Disneyland approach to that kind of thing. But I just, the number of objections that we get around our maintenance folks won't do that. Like it feels as though there's a desperation to just keep them on the property. Please, please, please. I need to have a heartbeat in that seat, and ask them to do extra or extending their job kind of like definition, or even including them in the overall performance of the building by these kind of conversations. It feels as though there's often a lot of rejection around that. Is that just some of the people that I'm talking to, or is that kind of like the old way of doing things? Like where have you guys felt that? Have you felt that in your experiences?
Yeah, I would argue that we've kept the same operating model for 40 years, and we've just added more stuff for them to do because consumer preferences have changed, technology's changed. The role has just gotten bigger from what it used to be. So part of that challenge is, hey guys, I don't need a new tech. I don't need a new app. I just need to go do the thing. Can I just go do the thing? I don't want to produce a bunch of extra data for you because you need to run some analysis and then go throw it to asset management and go do all these other things. I just want to fix the fridge, right? And I think part of that challenge, right, if you think about sales world, if you're in the sales world, right, like talk to salespeople, they hate Salesforce, but the reason we have Salesforce is to create a bunch of data for us to understand our customers better. So how do we get the information we need to make better decisions in a sort of systematic and programmatic way, while also allowing our people to go do what they need to go do and what they're really good at? That's kind of the corollary that I really think about is how do we take some of these things that we've added to their plate, remove it, and either we assign it to a centralized team or we automate it through some technologies that have advanced over time. Or we simply just say, this is not necessary because our customer is really demanding that we just get to them in 24 hours and fix whatever their issue is. And we'll get to sort of the more systematic approaches of other things over time. That's kind of where, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. The original question.
We're moving into communication, right? The conversation communication. So like, how can we optimize the job for what they're best at, right? Which is, just came off a conversation with that. And so like, if I heard you correctly, David, where you were going was that, okay, there's certain parts of their job they're not really good at. There's certain parts of the job that they are the best at. And so we keep them doing the stuff that they're the best at, then figure out what is the job that looks like that can do the stuff that they're not great at. And that can be part of what the centralization starts to feel like. And so, Tim, you talked about floating teams, which to me sounds like has even greater vulnerability from a communication perspective because they're not always in the same building. How are you guys thinking of mitigating the communication gap there?
Great question. It is something that is always evolving, and communication through that team is typically through text, email, things of that nature, where they're not at one specific site. I can't go to that site and visit with them every single time.
Yeah.
Now with our floating teams, I include my floating maintenance on all of my maintenance meetings. So they get brought in on our in-person meetings. They're included in our virtual meetings so that we're communicating over and over and over. The problem is because the diversity in our portfolio, they're going to a low-income site today or a Class A high-rise tomorrow, which is both an asset and a deterrent because they know they're going to know more about the assets that we have in our portfolio than the actual on-site team. So that's where they're more valuable.
Because they have that, they've touched different buildings.
They've got a broader touch.
And in those floating teams, what's the opportunity for them from a specialization perspective?
It's difficult because they are touching so many different properties. We try to identify after 90 days where to place them to make them most successful. It's more of a working interview for me when we have some red flags or some questions about some of the maintenance guys so that I can verify that they can change the light bulb. Everybody tells me they can work on something, but until they actually get in front of it, do they actually know how to work on something? And when they're placed on site, there's so many more restrictions on performing somebody out or moving them into a better position. When they're on the floating team, it's much easier to work through those challenges.
So when you think of those floating teams, is that, and this is with respect to resident experience, is it kind of more of a, we have to, there's a bona fide gap at this property and we have to have an answer that's going to raise the floor and we need to close that gap. Otherwise we stop the bleeding kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And is there accountability? When we talked earlier about the resident experience, about them, meeting people as they're walking through, or someone's taking their first lease, is the floating team kind of like your tiger team to be able to kind of float around and close gaps, but they don't have the accountability of needing to, create the sense of community at a building? Or is that kind of, are they shielded from that part of the P&L?
Yes and no. Again, it comes down to the coaching aspect, and because you are a floating team, we expect you to act the same way as if you were on site, if not even more, open. And hey, I haven't seen you here on this property before. Yeah, I'm here to help out for a few days. My name's Michael, whatever it may be, and be more personal that way, because that also creates a positive resident experience. That the resident understands that we're bringing in resources to fill in those gaps, or we're not letting things fall through the cracks.
So then with the kind of so using David's formula, right? What Dave was talking about, and what you just chatted about, to equal the resident experience, which Jamie is pursuing, like I know we're all pursuing, but ultimately accountable for, like how does technology play a role in achieving that, given that the status quo, the legacy operating model it's kind of a non-starter? So how do you use tech? What tech are you looking at? What have you used in the past? Those kind of things. And what problems, and probably most importantly, what problems did you solve with tech?
Tech is a tricky one for maintenance guys, because some of the more mature, old school maintenance guys don't like tech. They want a paper work order. They want a paper make ready sheet. They want to go in, they want to write it down. They want to check off their boxes and be done. So tech right now, especially as we're evolving into more of a centralization piece, does tech work on the property? Do we have cell phone coverage gaps? Do we have technology gaps where we need to overcome those, and training opportunities? And that's where it's tricky for a tech position in the maintenance world, where how does this tech work with our operating software?
Right, because the tech that's walking around with a yellow sticky of leaking toilet in 1102, that's not going to help the communication problem.
No.
Right.
Go ahead, Jamie.
I was going to say, I think what we need to create in the industry is a way that we can blend the tech needs of the offices and the tech ability, the technology ability that our techs currently have. You think of all the new technology that's coming out, even, with being able to walk by something and you're getting pinged, almost taking some of the need to update technology from a manual aspect away from those techs. I like to kind of equate it to thinking of it like you're pet tracking almost a UPS package, where you can click like track online and see exactly every step of the way on it. That is the expectation of our residents. They want to be able to see exactly when the maintenance guy has received the work order, when they're planning on kind of coming, and every step of the way through the process. But that's a lot of touch points for a maintenance tech to be physically manually creating. So from a technology perspective, it's out there, but how do we create that from a multifamily experience to eliminate the need for those manual updates from a tech, and just allow them, whether it's through a cell phone or a device or whatever, where they can walk to the property, they show up on property and it says they're on property today. And then they're walking into your building, they're on their way to your unit, they're 10 minutes out, or whatever that looks like, and being able to create those communication touch points from an AI perspective, utilizing the technology that exists in today's environment.
So who buys that tech? Like, who's the buyer? Whose budget?
I mean, I think there's a lot of uses for it from, a property perspective, and it would hit probably the overall operations budget from a communication and resident experience aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, I'm old, so going back to the days where we had radios, we had walkie-talkies, we didn't have cell phones, and then we gravitated to the Nextel things, and now we have cell phones. But now, like when we lose so much production because of tech on the maintenance side, because a property manager needs a maintenance guy, so she sends him a text, and then he pulls out his phone and he's looking at the text and is responding to the text. And how many minutes of production is lost because of that? Mm-hmm. And we have so many of our supplier partners that have geo-fenced our properties so that we can see your guy is on site now. The invoice is correct. Where if you try to institute that with on-site teams, you're going to get a lot of pushback, and you're going to have more turnover. if you can't, there's a joke and everybody's heard it. If you can't find a maintenance guy, it's because he's in his own unit if he lives on site. So if you're tracking them and you're like, why are you in your unit? That's big brother, 9.0 of tracking people and making sure the production is there.
I think part of the challenge is that it goes back to sort of this additional admin aspect that we've put onto people to really put in data, right? To inform others around them and keep them abreast of what's going on. However, part of that is also kind of what Jamie was touching on, is this change in consumer preferences, right? The world around them is now telling them when their package is going to be delivered, when it was shipped from the store, that the order was created, and we haven't gotten there on the maintenance side because the technology hasn't gotten there, or how we understand where we are in that process of getting things done hasn't gotten there, right? The resident puts in a work order, and most systems, and I know some of the big guys have been trying to create some things, but it still takes action internally for somebody to say, hey, we received it, we're on our way, we'll be there in 24, 48, or whatever hours, or hey, somebody's coming, all right, oh, I gave notice. Like, it's still a very manual kind of thing within some sort of archaic kind of communication system that's 20-something years old, and we haven't really updated those workflows. But at the end of the day, there are actions that we need to monitor that are taken that trigger a lot of the things that Jamie was talking about, where somebody is on their way to fix something, to do something, to create something. And the technology is getting better, right? But it's all about, the tech can't just be a bunch of feature-rich random stuff. It's got to be aligned to, what do we need to do to create the resident experience that my residents actually want, right? Not, hey, my resident, gets a coupon. It's not helpful, right?
Yeah.
No, they're like, hey, I had an issue. I want to know when somebody's coming. I want to know when it's going to be dealt with and done. So putting the right things in place to communicate on one side, and then understanding what are the triggers, right? And if I'm now adding those triggers going, well, my maintenance guy has to go in and type something when he's on the way. And my maintenance guy now has to go do something else and hit a few more buttons when he's done, and take a picture and do all these extra things. You're creating a lot more sort of admin process around when he's like, dude, I just wanted to fix the thing. They're going to know it's fixed when I leave because it's going to work. Mm-hmm. And you're like, but you just added 30 minutes of admin work to this work order kind of concept. So it's, how do we find the right triggers that automate a lot of this stuff? And how do we find the technology that takes those things, that 30 minutes worth of admin work, and reduces it to like 1 minute or a few seconds kind of thing?
Yeah,
absolutely.
But we mentioned the pizza tracker or the Amazon shipment notification piece more than a couple of times today, and I hear it very frequently. And so the question there is that what can we learn? So the residents are getting their experiences from other industries, mm-hmm. right? We don't have a choice in that competition. So are we actively learning from other industries and seeking to bring that over? Like, is there an intentionality around that?
I would say no. I think other industries, other trades are far more advanced than we are. I mean, mm-hmm. you used to, when you were getting cable installed in your house, you were given an 8-hour window. Now because again, it's the pizza, or Uber Eats tracker where you can see exactly where they're at and how many stops are you before the next stop. So, HVAC for residential does it, plumbing, any trade that you have coming to your own personal home that's not an apartment has that technology. Mm-hmm. But how is the cost benefit worth it in the multifamily industry versus the residential HVAC?
I mean, I think the cost benefit comes into the play when we talk about the amount of maintenance techs there are in the industry available for hire. and you talk about the quality people that you're looking for, I constantly have heard that like maintenance techs get passed from community to community, and we're like, we can't lose them. They may have a really bad attitude, but they can fix the light bulb, they can fix the AC, so we can't afford to lose them. They don't want to adapt. I've had maintenance techs on my properties before where we're like, yeah, they won't adapt to the cell phone, so we're making X, Y, and Z accommodations to try to fix that from using our leasing team or whatever it is to do some of that technology stuff, because they won't adapt to that. So it's a little bit twofold. I understand where Tim's saying about like, if Big Brother's watching you, we're going to lose a lot more people. And I think we need to, focus on increasing the soft skills that our maintenance techs have and our maintenance supervisors have from that angle, so they understand why it's important and why we would be making that change. I don't think it's something where you can flip a light bulb on and all of a sudden install this technology and not expect to ruffle some feathers.
Well, again, be scared with the data that you're collecting.
Correct.
I mean, if we're putting these trackers on our maintenance guys and we're like, oh my God, why has he been sitting in the shop for 3 hours? Is he doing the admin stuff or is he in there sleeping? I mean, there's a lot of our supplier partners, they have GPS trackers on their vehicles so that they know when their salespeople are touching and they're entering it in the Salesforce. And I get those notes. So what's the benefit of tracking if we're going to be scaring people away?
Well, the tracking one is an interesting conversation in terms of the problem you're trying to solve. Like we deployed trackers once on site, imagine 12,000 laborers, and they ended up everywhere. Like they were in the porta potties, they were on dog collars, they were everywhere. And what we didn't solve is the problem we're trying to solve.
And I think part of the challenge in all of this is a lack of understanding of sort of like outcomes from a lag indicator perspective and a lead indicator driver sort of like incentive kind of thing. Coming back to like our conversation earlier around renewals, right? Mm-hmm. If you just think about the numbers, you already know that 25% of people are just not renewing because of life changes and circumstances and things. So you're really working with a 75% pool already kind of like diminished down. Mm-hmm. So when you're just basing people's, call it incentive type things on sort of the 100% pool and on an outcome-based kind of thing rather than a action-based, what can they control, what can they be doing, what can they be delivering kind of thing, their incentives kind of get diminished, right? It's the classic, my property set a really aggressive NOI goal, property managers or even maintenance supervisors get bonused on NOI outcomes, but markets changed, dynamics changed. We got a big hole because of insurance or taxes or whatever in the budget, or, we had to use concessions before we even thought we'd get in there. Now everybody's behind the 8 ball, right? They're never going to make NOI bonuses no matter how hard they try. Mm-hmm. So now you've disincentivized the entire team to really kind of catch back up. So really focusing on what actions can they be taking? What actions every day should the maintenance team be doing that they can control on their own, and then really driving incentives around that, I think start to change the story around that.
But that's not like earth-shaking management science.
No, it isn't.
It's the basics.
But the basic.
Look, at the end of the day, and look, I'm going to be controversial here in saying finance and asset management has driven so much of how the business is run because it's their leading indicators. Their leading indicators are occupancy, rent growth, and NOI, because that's going to determine how their distributions go, the value of the property, right? Mm-hmm. Like those are their lag indicators on how they think about positioning and doing those things. Those are lag indicators, those other things for all operations. Operations is all about what actions can I take today. And I think because the story has been finance has driven so much of the outcomes, especially over the last 15 years, as the industry came out of the GFC, as a lot of things turned really well, and everything was up and to the right up until the last couple of years, that it's been a challenge for operations to kind of change and really understand, okay, what can I do? What kind of follow-ups? What kind of sales kind of conversations, even on the maintenance side, can I be doing to add value? What kind of customer experience stuff can I be doing to really add value from that perspective, and then driving those actions in a more systematic way and programmatic way, rather than and aligning those incentives that way. Yes, outcomes do drive real, and you need to have those outcomes to even have cash to pay bonuses, but you have to be realistic on, all right, what actions can people be taking, and understand that markets are going to drive so much of the outcomes to a certain extent.
So then, so is there an agreement between, because the P&Ls matters to be able to pay everybody all these things, like, is there an agreement, or is there not, the marketing and maintenance, is there regular conversations on how the relationship needs to, or how they're partners? Like, is it generally accepted that marketing and maintenance is a partner?
That's a great question, because
That's a no. That's a no. Tim,
I would say that the vast majority, I would say marketing and maintenance are very separate. They don't interact.
Are they adversarial?
Tim and I have worked together. A little bit, because you hear, everyone should be one team, but in reality, everyone's looking for somebody else to blame. They're looking for the problem, why the shoe dropped, why the renewals are leaving. They're looking for the problem. Whether it's marketing's looking for why the leads aren't coming in. Oh, it's reputation. And why is our reputation poor? Oh, we had a few negative reviews from maintenance, or the units aren't looking great, or the curb appeal is not great. And same goes with maintenance. Like, they're just like, oh, marketing's doing, demanding things, or they don't understand it. So they don't take a role into it. They're not being included in the conversation, and they're only thinking about the work orders that they have to do that day, which is very important to think about what they can change that day. But by including both in the conversation and having everybody understand the why and the bigger picture of things, I think you can start to train people to have the long-term goals together.
Like, if
my guys are worried about marketing, that's a concern for me, because that's more for upper level to worry about how marketing and maintenance can work hand in hand. Now, if they're aware of it, that's fantastic. That also means they're aware of their curb appeal. They're aware of their position on the property, their presence. That's where the marketing piece, where I want my guys to be concerned about.
Yeah, and I guess when I was asking the question, I was more so at the leadership level, right? Is that partnership exists? And like, do you guys have agreements in terms of like, hey, we're going to do this for this reason and for that reason, and we're both partners in the outcome? Because I agree with you, Tim. Like, there's still a job, despite all of this, there's still a job to be done.
Absolutely.
I think it should be a stronger focus for everybody. We preach all the time about curb appeal, but we're often preaching to the leasing team and to the community manager and all of that sort of stuff. When we're talking about training and different aspects of that, I think Tim and I had a very unique relationship at Avenue 5 in how we communicated it and worked through problem solving together. But I would say that that's probably not happening as often in the industry as it should be from a high level leadership perspective.
Because wouldn't that solve a lot of the problems? And now we're back to communication again. But just aligning the objectives between marketing and maintenance at the leadership level, like, even, go back to your stories when you guys were meeting at 5 and working together. It sounds like your collaboration was self-led, not like there wasn't a regular cadence meeting. It sounds like you guys both recognized the need to solve this problem and said, hey, we're both capable people here. Let's go, meet and work together. Is that something that you see in new organizations where it's like, hey, maintenance, and it's like, reminds me of those Star Trek days, right? Like, she can't take any more, Captain, like, where you have like the bridge where you've got engineering and you've got, navigation coexisting.
I think it's a unique situation for Jamie and I, but I think we've both, now that she's moved on to Garrett, I think that's something that she has brought to Garrett as well, where she understands the maintenance piece. I understand the marketing piece and how they work side by side. We're trying to move forward with that, with staffing changes and still keep that. But Jamie and I would go on property watch with ownership groups, and she would critique our make readies, and she'd say, Tim, you need to fix this. Tim, you need to fix this. I'm not coming to Jamie and say, hey, we need to do more marketing. We need to do this. Because that's not my realm. But she can point out the things through the different lens that she looks at. And that's where marketing and maintenance and property management all work cohesively, because everybody sees things through a different lens. And whether a maintenance supervisor has been on site for 6 months or 6 years, they're going to have blinders on to certain things in their property, and it's having the additional resources to point those things out.
Well, I really got to go back to what David said though about finance and asset management driving this though, because maintenance and marketing can work together to the best of their ability, but if finance and asset management are driving things from a budget perspective and not giving maintenance the tools that they need to solve the problems, either from a curb appeal perspective or from a resident experience perspective, we don't have the money to replace all those ACs right now. We don't have the money to repaint the curbs. We don't have the money to do all of that. It's going to be a moot point either way. And so I think that the fact that maintenance or the fact that finance and asset management are such the main drivers in this industry, there will always be kind of a stopgap there.
What's interesting though, is you look at customer experience science, and almost universally, when you put the customer in the middle of the circle, you reduce cost. Almost universally. And the case studies go on forever, right? When you stop thinking about how you deliver a service and start thinking about how the service is consumed, you start saving money everywhere. You can't help but start saving money. And so it's interesting that the proof has occurred in other industries, like over and over and over again. And then you've got a financially driven decision-making framework that could easily look at the results from other industries. And there's still, is someone waiting for someone to put their hand up?
Here's I think the pervasive problem as I've zoomed out a little bit more. It's a highly fragmented industry, even from just like a manager perspective, right? Mm-hmm. The top 5 managers, manage 7% of all units in the US, right? And you get to the top 50 and they're managing maybe 20%, right? And that goes from nearly 1 million units down to like 35,000 units. Like that's the stratification of the number of managers in the top 50. And now get below that, the smaller regional managers, the owner operators, the different kinds of constructs. And that's not even talking about ownership side, right? And you have all these people that own apartments. You have all these people that own different things, small groups, big groups. They all think they have their own unique perspective. And I think that fragmentation has then led into sort of the vendor side, right? You don't have, yes, you might have a few national vendors on maybe some key pieces of like maybe an ERP software. But even within that ERP software landscape, you've got all the tools that you need within that to even operate, and whether you use some of these prop tech things. So you got this whole prop tech ecosystem. You got all these managers, and then you have all these owners. All that fragmentation together has a lot of different opinions. When you go to like, how many food delivery apps do you have? Like kind of 5, 6 maybe, right? How many driving, you've got Uber, and you got Uber and you got Lyft. How many like sort of national retailer kind of things, right? Would you have these bigger, much more scaled enterprises and what's really kind of going on there, you sort of drive a lot of standardization, right? You really have 2 big phone makers. Now you have like 5 phone companies. So you can drive to some sort of standardization within certain things, but that's been, I think, the biggest challenge for us is that it's so highly fragmented. Everybody's trying a little something different. Everybody's doing something a little different, thinks a little differently. When you hop from company to company, they think about sales or maintenance or what's important or what's not a little differently. Finance thinks about things that are a little bit different all the time. So I think that fragmentation, it's not that people are like doing things like ill will or willy-nilly or whatever, and they kind of know what the core problem is. But it's also why we're not like gravitating towards like, oh yeah, the customer at the center, and then, okay, well, how do we address that customer best, right? Somebody's going to go, well, we should just have great names on the side, or we should have, white painted picket fence, or we should have focus on safety only. There's a lot of like nuance that kind of goes into really understanding customer. And at the end of the day, real estate's just highly local, and it's always been that way. And that's why construction and real estate have been so challenging to really truly scale in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
That's my opinion and 2 cents. And
but I think you've also said though that the old way is not really a choice anymore.
That doesn't mean that people aren't going to be like,
you're not going to try.
Everyone thinks they got their magic wand and the perfect way of doing things, or the perfect change for doing things. And that goes for vendors too. They all think that they've got the new product out there. And then we have 40 products to choose from when you're talking about, a centralization aspect or the new AI out there. I mean, the amount of evolution that's taken place in the last 5 years in the industry. You got 7 different self-guided tour options, and they all do things differently. Not one of them. It's not like AT&T and Verizon. You're like, yep, it's a cell phone provider and they're going to provide me cell phone service. They all do things so vastly different in how their approach to doing things. And I think that, like David said, like management companies and owner operator, everyone's doing things a little bit differently. They all have the same concept in mind, but just from a different perspective.
Well, and it's because of the consumer. There's so many different consumers. The resident experience is different for every single resident. And the person that we drop off the popcorn for because we completed their work order and we're giving them a little goodie, they're allergic to popcorn and they're going to be mad that we gave them popcorn. Are you trying to kill me? The resident experience is different for every single person. And how do you streamline that for everybody? You can't just paint the general paintbrush over everybody.
Yeah.
25 years ago, you didn't have a Google review, you didn't have a Kingsley report, you had word of mouth. And so, your curb appeal, back to the basics, was how you got residents to come look and tour. They looked at you in a catalog or a magazine, and then they drove up to the community. So getting all the way back to those basics is creating the resident experience from the very bare minimum.
So with the goal of kind of closing this out, because this could go on for a part 2, no problem. And I don't think we're in a position to even offer a resolution, but maybe offering, if we go around the horn and offer, what would you consider, how would you decide on what to do? Or who do you involve? If there is a desire to achieve both goals together, I need to save money and I need to improve retention, right? So those are kind of like universally, it's very hard to get a disagreement around that. How would you, start, Jamie, if you don't mind, start with you. How do you put that forward? How do you decide? Who do you partner with? How would you get that initiative rolling? Who budgets it? That kind of thing.
I mean, that's a can of worms of a question right there. I think really the main aspect of looking at it is just directly from the communication piece. I think if we can maintain the communication between techs and the on-site team and the residents in a capacity, even if that's not the techs doing it, then your resident experience for the most part will still be there. Mm-hmm. And if that communication piece drops, that centralization aspect is going to crumble because things aren't going to get done how they need to get done, and residents aren't going to be happy, and the on-site team is going to be driven crazy by the amount of customer complaints and dealing with all of those. So I think, starting from the top down, starting on that communication piece, what does that look like before we move to a centralization aspect, and how do we maintain those touch points is going to be, really important, and do that admin work still while focusing on what the techs need.
Outstanding. Tim, how do you feel?
Being consistent, 100% being consistent. Do what you say what you do. If you have a touch point on a work order one time, you have to have a touch point on a work order every time, because the one time that you don't is going to be the one time that they remember. They're never going to remember the 100 times that you had the touch point, but they're going to remember the one time you didn't.
Okay. David, you can give us a C as well, so we can really have a nice little triple C here.
Guys, I was going to say top down. I don't know how to get into a C. How about customer experience? About that.
Freebie.
Customer experience strategy is honestly, like you touched on it, right? If we can all just get to a point where we're putting the customer in the middle,
Mhm.
and we're just thinking, and I'm not talking about like boiling the ocean here, right? Like, I'm just saying, what are like 3 ways we can deliver greater customer experience? Where are we missing the mark? And let's just do those 3 better tomorrow, maybe the day after, right? Like let's just work on that. Let's create a quarterly goal around, if we just improve these 3 things that we know we're failing at from a customer experience perspective, then we know that the outcomes should be greater revenue and lower cost, because that's what all the studies and all the things have ever told us. So let's set up a goal to be like, hey, let's do these 3 things better. Let's see if we actually did them better, and let's see what the outcomes kind of become. Set up your own kind of pilot, test case, whatever you want to call it, on that perspective. The second piece is, and this is where like I got personally, we started our journey of centralization and specialization like in 2019, moved really quickly on the marketing front in 2020 because we had to, and then spent 21 doing a whole, call it future of work analysis. How do we all work together? And that included a big piece of maintenance. And I was like, man, this is our secret sauce. This is whatever. And what I quickly learned over a couple of years of just trying to do it ourselves is that if we don't get on things like this and sort of evangelize our challenges, as well as how are we thinking about this collectively as an industry, we're never going to get to a place where we may change how we actually operate, because we're not going to get to a sort of standard. Now, I think people are moving in a direction, but it is very slow. So I think the more we can get in conversations, talk to others, talk about these things. I know Funnel had a conference. AIM, like you said, has been very at the forefront of bringing some of these conversations up. I know it's starting to really bubble up in a more meaningful way, where people are starting to gravitate and be okay with sharing some of these like secrets you might call internally. I think you're going to start to break down, how did you do with this challenge? Because some of this is like, if my maintenance guy has to do it differently, or my hiring program is different than somebody else's in a highly fragmented industry in a very meaningful way, it's going to be a much more costly transition for me to hire somebody away from somebody else, train them how to do it. They're not going to like it. They're going to leave. And now I'm in this vicious cycle of, what are we doing here?
Yeah. And I think that when you think about customer experience, just to add to that, it's humans that are in these buildings, not imagined people. They're humans. And so then the core thing that humans are seeking to do is avoid pain and discomfort. So if we can thinking about raising the floor before we throw another pizza party is one way of considering the customer experience as a priority. How can we make it easier, frictionless, all those things? Because like if we put in more apps to make it more complicated because we're supposed to make that one moment better, we're actually going the wrong direction. So wonderful. Thank you everyone today. Communication, consistency, customer experience. God, we got 3 C's out of it. Someone in marketing is happy. Appreciate everybody.
Any day.
Yeah, appreciate everyone for joining us today and everyone for listening. I'm looking forward to the next conversation. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll put this on the podcast. You can listen for it and for repeat. Otherwise, it's on LinkedIn Live. You can listen to it there and add any comments and we'll all get pinged. Thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.